participation in government, increased understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. We are nonpartisan and therefore also do not support any political candidate. And you can go to our website, lwv.westford.org, to learn more. So before we get into the main event of the evening, which is to review all the articles on the warrant for the upcoming town meeting, I'd like to take a moment to point out a few sort of housekeeping issues, but also very important issues. You'll get a lot of information tonight, but if you want even more information, you can go to the town's website at westfordma.gov. There is really a treasure trove of information there. There's a budget page with slides and presentations, a budget calculator, different resources, and frequently asked questions. In addition, you'll find the town moderators page, Angela Harkness, and I'm going to turn it over to her to sort of hit the highlights of what to expect in terms of the execution, logistics, and of town meeting. So Angela, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Vicki, and thank you as always to the League for hosting this event, which is extremely informative for the voters. So a couple of procedural things that we've changed since the last meeting to make it more convenient for voters to attend. When you arrive at town meeting, which is going to be held at Westford Academy, you'll find that there's parking at Westford Academy, but also at the Crisafulli and Robinson schools. There'll be shuttle buses running continuously throughout the day from the Crisafulli and Robinson schools back and forth to WA to transport people who park off-site to the site of the meeting. There will also be 26 handicap accessible spots directly in the front of the entry door. The entry for everyone will be at the main door of the building. And anyone who has
Angela's talking, I might actually have
handicap placard or plate can use any of those spaces. When you go into the building, there'll be a bit of a change. Any non-voters will be directed to rooms 103 and 104, where the meeting will be broadcast. There'll also be a designated area where folks can drop off any children they've arranged for free child care for, and the kids will be brought down to the free childcare area. And just to make mention of that, there's both free childcare and free transportation available at the meeting, but you do have to register in advance, and you could do that through links on the town moderator's page. Or also for the childcare through the rec page, and for the free transportation through the Council on Aging page. The voters will be directed to the tellers to check in. And again, a little difference this year, the tellers will be in the Bell lobby. There will be multiple tables with tellers there to check people in. When you get checked in, you'll get a hand stamp. We'll initially be stamping people with a blue hand stamp, and that means that they'll be sitting in the gym. They'll go from the tellers to the gym, where they'll get a clicker. The clicker will have a blue designation on it, and that clicker will only work in the gym. The blue clickers will only work in the gym. It'll match your hand stamp, and you need to stay in the gym to vote. When the gym is full, we'll be giving people red hand stamps after that, and they'll be directed to the PAC or the auditorium. And the red clickers that you get, if you're directed to that room, will only work in the auditorium or the PAC. So it's very important for people to understand that they need to stay in the room that they've been initially sent to with the clicker that matches that room, because the clickers won't work anywhere else but in the room designated for them. We are going to have coffee and donuts in the caf in the morning, run by Westford Academy Club, and there will be pizza and drinks in the vending machines at lunchtime, or you can bring a bag lunch. If you intend to buy either coffee and donuts or pizza, please remember to bring cash. There won't be any credit taken for those items. We'll start in the morning between 9 and 9:30 with the initial articles, those being the budget articles, and those will be the first ones on the agenda. And then after lunch, which should be around 12 to 12:45. We'll start with the zoning articles, including the MBTA zoning article. I think that about takes care of the new things that are happening and the improvements that have been made, and we hope lots of people will attend.
Thank you, Angela. And now, before we get into the main event, which is the discussion of the various warrant articles, just a couple of housekeeping issues. You'll notice at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should have a little area that says Q&A. So as we go through each of these articles, if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A, and when the time is right, I can, excuse me, I will let the panel know this. I will monitor questions. I will do the best I can to get it up in a timely manner, but please have a little bit of patience. This preview is designed to be informational, designed for everybody to gather information on the various articles. So this is not a debate. So I'm only accepting questions. Please save any statements or positions for town meeting. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Lay, our town manager, Dan O'Donnell, our finance director, Scott Hazelton from the select board, Dr. Christopher Chu, the superintendent of schools, and I don't see Valerie, so she might not be there tonight, to discuss articles 1 through 4. Just a little side note, typically we do take articles individually, but for the budget articles, we're kind of take them in a group tonight. So without further ado, I will actually, before I get into that, we have a logistics question regarding town meeting. Does non-voters include staff and others who may be called upon to answer questions?
So at the beginning of the meeting, as I always do, I'll have a motion that allows staff and town consultants who might be participating in the meeting by way of making presentations or answering questions. I'll ask that the meeting approve a motion allowing them to speak during the meeting. And presuming that we do get a 2/3 vote for that, then those folks will be allowed to speak at the meeting. But no other non-voters will be able to speak unless someone makes a motion to allow a specific individual to speak, and that motion passes by 2/3, and that's by our town bylaws.
Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Kristen for articles 1 through 4.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on a probably busy Thursday evening where you'd probably been outside with your family or others. We finally had a touch of spring today. Before I start, I just wanted to check and see if Scott Hazelton, the vice chair of the select board, wanted to address the attendees.
Oh, thanks, Kristen. I think you're going to hear tonight a lot of information from many individuals on the town staff and other town boards, and an enormous amount of work has gone into this budget. It is, I understand, a painful thing for many of us in terms of the override that we're requesting. It was something that we spent months, and Chris will cover, I think, some of those timelines, but literally months of time looking at how do we, weigh the cost to the taxpayer against the cost to town services, and what is that optimal mix. We think we have achieved that after many months, but I just want to say up front, we understand that this is not without some difficulty for those in the community who are on fixed incomes, limited incomes. I think Chris will also cover the fact that we're trying to maximize our options for those who need relief, and I think we'll cover that certainly on the town website. But I think it's pretty much a case of saying thanks to everybody who worked on this, and to those in the community. Understand this is not something that we take lightly, but it's a path we think we need to go down.
Thank you, Scott. So I will take articles 1 through 4 collectively. as they all deal with the fiscal 25 budget. Just to give everyone a level set, as Vicky did state beforehand, we have a multitude of resources on our town website. Linked right off the homepage, there is a special budget page that has information strictly related to the fiscal 25 budget for the town and the schools. There is a calculator that those can use to apportion what their perceived fiscal year 24 tax increase may be if an override does pass. We have a multitude of resources for those who would like to talk about or explore exemptions if they meet those exemptions. We've also really enhanced the town meeting webpage. Before this year, all of the materials were really in a laundry list down a web page. We've tried to apportion those out article by article. So you'll see that it's hopefully a little bit more user-friendly when you're accessing that information. Also, before I get into the meat of Articles 1 through 4, just want to alert everyone that the Wi-Fi at Westford Academy is limited in the gymnasium and the PAC due to the amount of people that we expect. So if you would like to download materials in advance or print them in advance for your use at the meeting, we recommend that you do that because you may be limited in downloading items at the meeting. And we will have certain handouts and certain materials there, but we will not have enough for everyone as we are trying to save some printing costs and trees and materials. So I just want to give that as a preview as well. Also, the beginning of next week, I will likely have, or the middle of next week, I will likely have what's called the State of the Town posted on that town meeting webpage that will give more of an overview related to the fiscal year 25 budget. There is a multitude of videos and explainers and memorandums out on the website right now. And if anyone has any questions or thoughts or needs more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or members of the select board in advance. And we're happy to walk you through those materials, as there's quite a lot. It's evolved over time. And for those who may not be quite familiar, it could seem a little bit overwhelming at the beginning, but we're happy to walk you through that. So just to give you an overview of where we started related to the creation of the fiscal 25 budget, back in January, February of 2023, we realized that we would have a lot of contracts due in fiscal 25. Not only labor contracts, but a lot of our service contracts, such as health insurance, trash and recycling, school bus transportation, several labor contracts, as well as other state apportionments, such as special education tuition coming due. And due to the rapid inflation that we've seen since we had those contracts before, we are seeing that those contracts are causing quite an increase for the town of Westford. We through the select board, created the budget task force that worked throughout the May through October timeframe to understand all of our existing revenue sources, all of our expenses, both on the town and school side, and any efficiencies or any areas where we think that we could operate in a different manner to reduce costs or to improve revenue. So I really urge you all to take a look at that budget task force report. It is about 90 pages. So if you look at the executive summary, that would really help level set where we started related to our budget challenges. A lot of people also are saying, Westford is the only town in this situation. Why is Westford doing this? I urge you to look at our area communities as well as other communities within the Commonwealth. Westford is unique because our town meeting is in March, so our budget creation was started much earlier than other towns. But there are many of our neighbors requesting from their town meeting an override budget this year. Groton and Dunstable will have town meeting a few days after us. Acton is contemplating this. I heard that several other communities such as Belmont and several South Shore communities are as well. So we're trying to gather that information through our regional planning agency to make sure that we're alerting all of our residents that Westford is not just in this alone, that many other municipalities are facing the same challenges due to their budgets. So the select board and the school committee, after seeing the outcomes of the budget task force, directed myself and Dr. Chu in the September-October timeframe to prepare two budgets for fiscal 25. One budget that we'll call the non-override budget that would be within the Proposition 2.5 increases that would have severe cuts to town and school budgets. That was created. We were also instructed to create a needs-based budget that would allow for our level services to continue and our staff to continue in a service manner that we currently see today. Dr. Chu and I both presented those respective budgets to the school committee and to the select board in December, and they received that report. And then we went through a series of public hearings with the finance committee in January and February. Throughout that process, there was a wonderful amount of participation and feedback provided, I think more than is usually happening at the finance committee. And the select board, after every FinCom meeting, came back to the table and reviewed the comments and the questions and the clarifications. And they at first asked for a reduction of the needs-based budget or the override budget by $500,000. Then at the conclusion of the Finance Committee public hearings, based upon all of the feedback that was required and requested a $1 million decrease to the needs-based budget. Based upon the feedback that was received and working with Dr. Chu and the school committee and our finance director, Dan O'Donnell, we were able to reduce the needs-based budget by $1.1 million as it was originally presented in December of 2023. Simultaneously, the select board investigated a series of override scenarios, how we can present to the voters the needs of the town over the next 3 years and how we could accomplish that through a series of reductions or efficiencies from the town side, as well as an influx of tax dollars through a Proposition 2.5 override if the town meeting votes for that and if the local election votes for that in May. At the last select board meeting, before the budget documents were finally issued, the select board did vote for a $6.8 million override. They started with several scenarios, such as an $8 million override, a $6 million override, but ultimately, based upon all of the information that was presented and the forecasts that we investigated, they felt that that was in the best interest of the town budgets, both town and schools, to sustain us over the next 3 years, and also to allow for reductions that will be necessary over the next 3 years to make sure that we don't have a financial cliff at the end of fiscal 27. So Article 1 is the article that is the needs-based budget, but I will say that it's a needs-based budget with cuts that were recommended by the Finance Committee and the Select Board. And we will have a multitude of slides to present to you at town meeting that presents that, and the motions document that is available online has the details related to that. I'll also point out that you should have received, or you will be receiving in the mail, your town meeting flyer or mailer, and that has all of those articles there, but much more detail are on the town website related to that. Vicki, would you like me to go into what is a Proposition 2.5 override and what is a stabilization fund before I move forward?
I actually think that would be an excellent idea, because I know some people are not as are new to this process. So it would be a really good idea to do that.
Sure, absolutely. So Proposition 2.5 is a state law that was enacted in 1980 that places a limit of municipalities can only increase their tax base by 2.5% per year through raising real and personal property. There's a common misconception that each individually property can be taxes increased by 2.5%, but that is not correct. It's the overall tax base. The individual's property tax increases are based upon valuation of the individual property, residential or commercial, based upon the market. And that's reviewed and evaluated by the assessor. And then the tax rate is set in November by the select board with the assessor's oversight. So when the levy limit is not sufficient to maintain the government services that the town desires, the town has the opportunity to vote through town meeting a budget over Proposition 2.5, and then through a ballot vote on that as well. So a Proposition 2.5 override is a permanent increase on the tax base, and is not just a 3-year. So when we're saying that we have an override for $6.8 million, if this passes, $6.8 million will be added to our levy, and then will be increasing by 2.5% in the out years. So it will not be 6.8, 6.8, and 6.8. It'll be 6.8 in the first year, and then 2.5%, 2.5%, 2.5% in all of the outlying years, unless there's another override in the future, which we are planning to not have to do that. And that's why we have these careful forecasts. So again, an override vote has to pass at town meeting by a majority vote, and then also has to pass at the ballot by a majority vote. And that is all through state law.
And
So-
Kristen, actually, I know sometimes I was confused by this the other day when we were having the conversation of the different scenarios. If it passes at town meeting, but doesn't pass at the ballot, or if it doesn't pass at town meeting and passes at the ballot, what are the steps that happen in both of those scenarios?
Sure. So I will speak slower because it's confusing, and I also want to make sure that I'm saying the right terminology. So I'll start with scenario 1, which is the override passes at town meeting and passes at the ballot. That means that there will be that permanent override added to the tax levy. If the override passes at town meeting but does not pass at the ballot, the select board has the option to call for a special election if they wish, if they want to try the question again, or they can say, no, we are not going to ask the question again. Town election has spoken. We will revert back to Article 4, which is the non-override budget, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail in a few moments. If the town meeting does not pass the override, if the town meeting does not pass the override, but the town election does pass the override, the select board have an opportunity to call for a special town meeting to ask the question of the override again with the information that town meeting has desired to approve an override. And if the override does not pass at town meeting and does not pass at the ballot, we would revert to the non-override budget, which is Article 4.
Thank you.
Sure. So I will not get into any more details related to the specifics of the budget related to Article 1, the override budget, without saying that that budget is to raise and appropriate the sum of $136 million plus additions from general fund, community preservation, revolving funds, and water enterprise, recreation enterprise, ambulance, stormwater, and others. If there's other questions related to that budget, we can certainly get to that in a little bit. I did want to move to Article 2. Article 2 is to create a stabilization fund for the override. So if the override budget passes, we will then be moving to ask town meeting to create a stabilization fund. This requires 2/3 majority vote of town meeting. And the intention of creating the fund would then be to ask town meeting under Article 3 to fund the stabilization fund. And we'd be asking to fund that with $2.6 million of the 6.8 million. So the deficit that we're seeing for fiscal 25 is $4.2 million. So the mechanics of creating a stabilization fund, it is allowed by state law for municipalities to create an override stabilization fund. It really helps us to fund and balance the budget over the next 3 years in our model. It would allow for us not to create several budgets per year if we're in tumultuous financial situations. And it would allow the influx of this override stabilization fund into future budgets with the vote of town meeting. So we want to be clear. I know there's some documentation going around that the select board could use these funds however they wish, but the use of the stabilization funds into an operating budget requires the vote of town meeting, so our legislative body. So again, and the select board would be able to fund an override stabilization fund on their own if we come into additional money that we could put in there to fund the budgets in the future. Many municipalities now are using an override stabilization fund to make sure that there is a smoothing of the budgets over the course of time, to make sure that override funds are being used to influx the operating budget, and to make sure that there is not as much uncertainty in out years. So I will move on to Article 4. So Article 4 is what we'll call the non-override budget, or the cut budget. And that is to raise and appropriate a sum of $132 million and change. So you'll see that there is quite a difference in those two budgets. We are seeing that we would have a substantial cut in school and town staff. But the majority of the requirements for that is because we are seeing our contracts growing so greatly for both services in out years. So we would just want to be clear that with both budgets that are presented, there will certainly be cuts required, but the cuts required for the Proposition 2.5 budget, which is the non-override budget, are quite a bit more substantial on the town and school side, because we just can't meet the challenges that we have today. So Dan or Dr. Chu or Scott, would you like to add anything related to Articles 1 through 4 that I may have missed?
I would just observe that, if you look at the website, we have a outline of all the various contributors to the budget deficit. I won't go over all of them, as Christian's mentioned some, but the key is about 40% of that is planned labor contract increases. 60% of that is outside contracts that are set in the open market. So health insurance, bus fees, trash pickup, and so forth. So to Kristen's point, to balance that entire deficit, we can't impact the trash, the health insurance, and so forth. We have to then take that on our service levels of employment. So hence the pretty steep cuts to people. It's not because of the labor contracts, it's because of partly, but it's primarily because of service contracts that are just, as we all have our home budgets, and I'm aware of the fact that we all have our home budget constraints with car insurance, home insurance, food, gas. Well, the town also has insurance and fuel, and those are the trash trucks and the buses, and so all of these things are hitting the town as well as you, and that's what's driving most of this problem.
I would just also add that Kristen mentioned the fact that we presented our initial budgets in December, just to remind everybody that there has been a large number of public meetings that has taken place since December, both the school committee meetings as well as the select board meetings, as well as the FinCom hearings, where we have talked about both budget scenarios in depth a number of times. And so if people are looking for additional information, all of that does exist on our websites as well for people to, if they have the ability and the time to review some of those conversations as well.
We do have one question, and seems now good time to ask this question. One of the finance committee members said that the teachers' salaries were over appropriated, and that is the reason that there is a need for a Prop 2.5 override. Can you speak to this claim? Thank you.
I would say the question that the salaries were over appropriated, that's a very strange way to ask that question. So I'm not really sure. Kristen, does that make a little bit more sense to you?
I'm just wondering if it might mean that when you signed the labor contract for Unit A, there were certain rates of that contract. We certainly don't know our budget for fiscal 26 and 27. We have projected those numbers, but when we settle a contract, we have to have out year raises and appropriations. I'm not sure if that's
right.
What the questioner is getting at.
I mean, in general, every contract that you settle, you don't know what the out years are going to entail in terms of what your budget capacity is. I mean, we know what the typical history tells us, but that is one of the scenarios in which you are always we're always developing the next year's budget that then we bring to town meeting. We're not developing the years that follow that, and that's one of the conversations that we're trying to have right now, which is the idea that we are projecting out the concerns for 26 and 27 as well too. I will say that the labor contracts that we have all been negotiated using the same methodology, where we've been committed as the town of Westford to bring our employees to the middle of the market basket, so that they're not at the high end, they're not at the low end, but they're in the very middle of the market basket when we are comparing them and their salaries to the comparable districts. And that's a methodology that we use for all of our town contracts. And when we looked at the data, we saw that our teachers had fallen below where they should be in the market basket, if you will, or where the districts were. And so our negotiated contract is bringing them to where they should be in the middle of that, which is consistent with all of our labor contracts.
And I'll just add to that. Certainly the school teacher contracts is a part of the reason we need an override, but as Scott alluded to, our trash and recycling contracts are going up. Our electricity and natural gas costs are going up. Our non-union labor needs are going up. Our health insurance is going up. Our special education tuition and school bus contracts. So the school teacher contract is not the sole and only reason that we need an override. It is both for town and school needs for fiscal 25 and beyond.
Thank you. Any more questions from the attendees with regard to Articles 1 through 4? Okay. We have one question. School budget, bottom of first page. 9,100 to 9,400 tuitions. 2,413,119. Could you please explain that?
Sure. I don't have the budget line right in front of me at this moment in time, but I would say any line item, and I don't have the function codes memorized, but if it says tuitions, it's going to be talking about our special education tuitions. And so we do pay when we have students who are outplaced in whether it's private day schools, residential schools, or collaborative public schools that are outside of our district based on whatever their individual needs might be. We do need to pay a tuition to that organization in order for them to support our students. And so that's what that line item is talking about. So every year that's across the country, definitely throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but every public school in the United States has certain tuition line items where they are paying tuitions to support students who they might not be able to meet the needs of that student within the specific public schools within the district.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Oh, there we go. I asked that question and here I get a response. It looks like the budget has reserves in excess of the goal of 5%. Why wouldn't you use those excess reserves to offset some of the need for an increase?
So I don't know if this question is talking about school or town reserve funds, but I can tell you that based upon the feedback we received from the Finance Committee and the additional research we did related to the town and school reserve funds, we are using a portion of that to use for the fiscal 25 budget.
All right. Well, why don't we move on then? Article 5 is part of the consent agenda, which is accepting reports, so we don't nearly need to discuss that. So let's move on to Article 6, which is approve fiscal 2024 budget supplemental appropriations. Take it away, Kristen.
Sure, I can take this one, Vicky.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
Great.
you.
So we only have 2 appropriations this year. The first one is for the sealer weights and measures for $976. Last year, we entered in a contract with the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments, or NIMCOG, to take over those sealer and weights and measures responsibilities for us. And we didn't have the exact pricing at the time of town meeting, but we are $976 short. So since it's a one-line budget, we do need to request a supplemental. The good news is they are staying steady at $16,500 for next year. So there is no increase in the budget for next year in FY25. The other line is just a planned appropriation that we have every year to appropriate the $400,000 for any snow and ice in excess of the budget. We purposely budget the snow and ice low at $400,000, and then we're allowed to deficit spend. So this is a planned appropriation that we have each year.
All right. Thank you. And I don't see any questions with regard to that. So we'll move on to Article 8, which is capital appropriations. We have a variety of people besides Dan with us to address any questions there, including Mike Wells, our Director of Technology, Jeff Goodwin, Chief Targ from the Fire Department, Kyle Fox from the DPW, and yep. So Dan, do you want to address this, or?
Sure, I'll give a brief overview on this. I won't read them all. They're all pretty outlined there. The first motion, we have capital appropriations in an amount of $2.45 million coming from free cash. It's part of the recommendation from our rating agency that we use one-time funds to purchase capital. And we see a lot of familiar recommendations here. We have our normal technology program for computer replacements. We have some upgrades to public buildings to replace HVACs and some surveillance cameras. There's a fire vehicle that needs replacement for $100,000. There's a school special education van for their new transition program that needs to be funded. We have some DPW studies out there for Hartford Road, West Street, North Main Street, and Groton Road. There are 5 vehicles here. This does not include the 2 6-wheel dumps that's being purchased through Chapter 90. We did receive $477,000 from the state this year from the new fair share apportionment money. So we're using that to catch up on some of our vehicles. One of the big ticket items here is $700,000 for the Stony Brook Middle School wastewater treatment plant for the rehab. This is the last of the 4 plants that we need to rehabilitate before our next permit comes up. We've done the other 3. And let's see here. We have some repairs at the Blanchard wastewater plant. And then we are supplementing the Jack Walsh tennis courts, $67,500. This project was originally appropriated as CPA funds last year. However, when the bids came back, when it was time to construct the courts, they came back higher, which we're seeing a lot of. So we are requesting to fund those at a free cash this year to get that project done.
I'm going to take a step back because I know one of the things when I first started attending a town meeting, I didn't know what free cash was. So if somebody could explain what free cash is for some of our participants who may be new to this process.
Sure. So free cash is like our savings. It's basically the money we have available to appropriate. And how we get free cash is that if we have revenue in excess of our estimated budgets, or if we don't spend all of our budget, so that money goes back to the general fund and gets certified as free cash by the Department of Revenue. We use that each year for one-time purchases, such as the capital, ARPA chloride expenses, or the snow and ice deficit. So those are typically how we use our free cash.
So for example, if you did not spend every dollar that was assigned for snow removal this year because we had a lighter winter, that difference would go into free cash.
Yeah, that will close out at the end of the year and becomes part of the certified free cash for next year. So that's our goal, is to get those numbers up because they're part of our reserves, where the select board policy is to be between 5 and 10% of the operating budget each year, which we're in the high 5s right now.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any questions with regard to the capital appropriations.
There's a bit more capital. You want me to touch on that too? It keeps going.
Yes, please do.
Sure. So We have different funds here besides free cash. We're transferring $50,000 from the Prospect Hill water storage tank to the town farm water tank project to wrap that up. The Prospect Hill, just so there's no confusion at town meeting, is a completed capital project that has excess funds available that we need town meeting to appropriate. So we're doing that here rather than use water enterprise retained earnings, so we can kind of clean up the books and get that money put to use. We have $20,000 from Stormwater Enterprise for a new pole camera, and then $22,000 from Ambulance Enterprise for radios technology for a new ambulance that we're trying to purchase. The second motion here is $600,000 bond authorization. It's non-excluded debt, which means it's within the levy limit. And it's for the Plain Road Sidewalk 2. Plain Road Sidewalk Phase 1 was already appropriated, so the goal here is to do both sections of Phase 1 and Phase 2 at the same time. Phase 2 goes from Grassy Pond all the way down to Depot Street at the East Boston camps. And if we complete both at one time, then we will realize some savings here. So it's in our best interest to do so. And finally, the third motion is to borrow for a new ambulance, which we typically don't do this for an ambulance. And long term, what I would recommend is once we have enough retained earnings, we appropriate those to purchase the ambulance. However, the lead time on buying an ambulance is about 30 months. So we want to get this ordered as soon as possible using the ambulance enterprise bonding authorization. So we do have the opportunity to rescind this debt or this authorization at a future meeting and just appropriate the available retained earnings. However, we don't have the available balance at this time. So this is our strategy going into it to place that order.
Okay. Are there any questions from the participants, attendees? And seeing none, I'll move on to Article 9, which is the construction of the PFAS treatment plants. I believe Kyle Fox from the DPW will sort of give us a brief overview of that article, please.
Hi, good evening, Vicki, and thanks for hosting this program tonight. We're asking voters to approve a bond in the amount of $24.5 million to upgrade 2 of our water treatment plants to treat PFAS. PFAS is commonly called now forever chemicals. They're in many of the products we've used on a daily basis, and there's significant health issues with those chemicals. Currently, the state has set a maximum contaminant levels for these chemicals of 20 parts per trillion. That's a very small amount and really hard to measure. But we currently meet that regulation with in all of our plants. We do expect sometime this spring, however, that the state is going to lower that maximum contaminant level to 4 parts per trillion. And when that happens, we will be out of compliance for our drinking water. And that's what will necessitate the construction of these treatment plants. And we'll have 3 years to comply with the new regulations, again, that we expect to be implemented this spring. So we're kind of getting a head start on the project.
We have a question. What is the expected effect on the average annual water bill for a household?
So that's a tough question at this point. There's a lot of factors that will weigh into that. Primarily when the construction completes and the bond debt actually hits the repayment schedule. We are looking forward to try and present some possible scenarios for what increases might be necessary for the plant. We've developed a 10-year model to look into the future to try and get a handle balancing all of our capital projects and what might be happening. We do plan to present this to the select board in April to kind of look at the long-term goals and get advice from the select board and from the water commissioners on how they want to proceed with funding the enterprise fund going forward, whether it's, every other year increases, smaller every year increases, or some kind of balance of that kind of program. So I can't give you a strong answer tonight because so much depends on what the actual cost of the upgrades are and when the debt actually hits the town budgeting process. But certainly there will be some increases required for the projects. And I will say that it's always important to remember that any of the water project costs are funded solely out of the enterprise fund by the water users and not out of the general tax base.
Let me see here. The next question comes from Heidi. Are the amounts listed, and this is sort of encompassing Articles 7 through 9. So are the amounts listed in Articles 7 through 9 included in the needs-based budget, or are these amounts over and above the 6.8 million?
But I can take that one. So capital we treat differently because it's not part of the annual operating budget. We use free cash, which is an available fund to actually fund this. So this is a capital recommendation moving forward, either within if Article 1 passes or Article 4 passes.
Okay, thank you. Relative back to the water rates, when the water rates are needed to be raised, what is the estimated range of possible effects? Could they double or triple?
No, we don't expect that at all. I hesitate to throw any numbers out because people may hold us to it, but our long range projections are possibly in the range of every other year increases of between 5 and 10%.
Has the town questioned if the state regulations fall under the unfunded mandate laws that prevent the state from requiring a town to spend funds on certain items like this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Becky. In this case, it would not be a state mandate. It would be an EPA mandate. So it doesn't fall into the unfunded state mandate category.
Okay. And there's another question or a statement here. I don't know what they're referring to, so I'm gonna ask that before I put it before the panel. So with that, why don't we move along to, okay, unfortunately, I don't see anybody from the CPA to address Article 10, so we can do that at town meeting.
Or I'm happy to do that as well, Vicky, if
Okay.
you want to do that. I might not be able to answer every question because I'm not on the CPA committee, but I can certainly give a brief overview and Dan can fill in on a few things as we've been following this, if you'd like.
I would love that. Thank you.
Sure. So the Community Preservation Committee recommendations is an annual article that town meeting members and residents see on a yearly basis. Part of your tax bill is a community preservation assessment or surcharge, and that goes into a fund that can be used for affordable housing, open space and recreation, and historic preservation. The town of Westford also gets a percentage of that money collected from the state based upon real estate sales within the Commonwealth. This year, our apportionment from the state has been much lower than in the past. I believe it's about 33 to 36%. So we do not see as much of a match as we have seen in the past. For this town meeting, there's a request to accept the recommendations of the Westford Community Preservation Committee for $3.481 million for a series of projects. And I'll go through the projects very quickly, but there is a lot more information on each individual project on our website. And the Community Preservation Committee had a series of meetings where they received presentations regarding these projects and provided input. So the first is for $30,000 from the undesignated fund balance for the Westford Museum for handicap accessibility plan. So this is not for handicap accessibility construction, just to plan for a handicap accessibility at that Westford Museum at 2 Boston Road. The next one is $190,000 from the undesignated fund balance for the Conservation Trust Fund for the future open space land purchases. The next is $4,208 from the undesignated fund for the June Kennedy Oral Histories Digitization Project. The next is $60,000 from the undesignated fund balance for supplemental funding for the O'Brien Farm Public Footbridge located at 18 Vose Road, Lot 2. I just want to note that there was already an appropriation for this project. The bids came in much over what was anticipated. So the Conservation Commission has requested additional funding for that project to be completed. The next is $163,000 from undesignated fund balance for the restoration of the Paris Center for the Arts Bell Tower, Bell Cradle, and Window Project located at 10 Lincoln Street. And I believe that is construction. The next is $2.22 million from the undesignated fund balance for the Stony Brook Track and Athletic Court construction located at 9 Farmer Way. $725,000 from the undesignated fund balance for the Namnasset Playground project located at 99 Plain Road. I do want to note that we also received $100,000 from the state as an earmark to complement that playground project. And finally, $89,400 from the undesignated fund balance for the comprehensive conditions assessment for the First Parish Church United project at 48 Main Street. So that concludes the projects that were recommended by the Community Preservation Committee, and we can take any questions if they are coming in.
I don't see any questions coming in at the moment. So why don't we move on to Article 11, which is the authorization of the revolving funds.
I could take this one. This is an article that we have every year. It's actually on the consent agenda. Basically, what we're doing is we're authorizing the expenditure limit for each of the funds that we see in the motions and warrant. Nothing has changed from last year, so it's basically approving the exact same thing from last year.
And that is the case with also Article 12 and 13, correct? That those are part of the consent agenda.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Moving on to Article 14, which is to accept local option to reduce residency domicile requirements for disabled veterans for property exemptions.
Great, and I can take this one as well. This year the assessor did have a resident come in who just moved to town, who is a disabled veteran, and they were wondering if we had this particular statute in place. What it does is it reduces the residency requirement for disabled veterans from 5 years to 1 year for them to qualify for this tax exemption, which is in the amount of $800. So we're asking town meeting to approve this so that person can get their exemption.
Great. And then Article 15, I believe, was part of the, 15 and 16, part of the consent agenda. So we will head right into Article 17 in the home stretch, which is Article 17 is update the floodplain zoning bylaw. And I believe Joseph is going to take that, or
No,
Jeff
I got this one.
Brissett.
Jeff Morissette, Director of Land Use Management. Thank you, Vicki. So as you mentioned, Article 17 is a proposal to amend the floodplain overlay district section of our zoning bylaw. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, periodically produces floodplain insurance rate maps that depict special flood hazard areas, such as the 100-year floodplain. And floodplain is defined as land within a community subject to a 1% chance or greater of flooding in any given year. Every so often, FEMA updates these flood maps based on additional mapping efforts and studies conducted. FEMA also updates some of the minimum requirements for permitting work within the floodplain. And FEMA did such an update in 2020. And so Westford is currently out of compliance with the FEMA's minimum standards. So if we don't update our zoning bylaw to come into compliance, we will lose our status as an NFIP community, or National Flood Insurance Program community. With federally backed mortgages, which is more than 99% of the mortgages out there, there is a requirement for properties that are within a special flood hazard area to have flood insurance. And so if you're in an NFIP community like Westford, you can always get federal insurance, federal flood insurance. But if you're not an NFIP community, you lose that status, then you can only rely perhaps on the private flood insurance, which is not always an option. So in Westford, there's currently more than 1,200 parcels of land that are affected by the 100-year floodplain. And there are 55 properties right now that currently benefit from this federal insurance through the NFIP process. The next flood maps for Westford are estimated to be updated by the middle of 2025. And if we don't update our zoning before then, we'll be suspended from the program. And so that would mean no more new insurance policies under the NFIP program, and there may not be more renewals of existing policies. So that's a problem. So the proposed amendment, it doesn't change the 100-year floodplain. It merely updates the standards to meet FEMA's minimum requirements. And basically it means if you're doing work within a floodplain, you need to get a permit. So on the town meeting section of the town's website, you can find the proposed bylaw language. It's actually fairly brief. You can find the planning board's written report and recommendation. And you can also see a map that shows the current locations of the 100-year floodplain in Westford. Planning board held a public hearing on this zoning bylaw amendment. And they closed it on March 4th, and they voted 5-0-0 to recommend this article to town meeting. That's all I have, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have. I think you're muted.
Yeah, that's what happens sometimes, you know. I'm not seeing any questions. So we'll move on to Article 18, which is the MBTA Communities Multifamily Housing Overlay, which is a mouthful. And I know there's been a lot of meetings and discussions in town from that. So Jeff, take it away.
This one's Joe.
Oh, this was Joe. Okay.
Sorry. Thank you all for joining this evening. Article 18 is the town's proposal to comply with the state's MBTA Communities Act. The MBTA Communities Act passed as part of the 2021 Economic Development Bill during the Baker administration. States that any community designated as an MBTA community must provide a zoning district where multifamily housing is allowed as of right. Westford is one of 177 communities in the Commonwealth that received this MBTA community designation. Categorized as an adjacent community, our zoning district has to meet a certain set of parameters that the state provides for us, which includes the following. Our district has to have a unit capacity of a minimum of 924 dwelling units, and that's based on our 2020 census data. Cannot have restrictions based on age or a number of bedrooms for these units. The district has to be of reasonable size, which the state says is a minimum of 50 acres, with at least half of that district being contiguous area. And our zoning has to be in place by the end of this calendar year. To meet this mandate, the town has conducted an extensive public planning process, including several public surveys, a focus group with persons age 55 and older. We had outreach at the 2022 and 2023 strategic planning retreats, and put together an advisory committee with representation from several boards and committees in order to get a variety of perspectives to formulate the best approach for Westford to address this new mandate. It was an iterative process. The advisory committee and the planning board, through their public hearing, brought forth this bylaw and the zoning map in the article for consideration at town meeting. The proposed zoning district is an overlay district, which means that people can still utilize the existing zoning in place today, or if they choose to pursue a project for multifamily housing, they'll have to adhere to the proposed bylaw and all the standards and design guidelines that are in it. Another way to look at it is it really provides another tool in the toolbox for property owners as they consider their short and long-term options for their property. And really, that was just one of many factors that the committee considered in developing the district area and the bylaw. The committee gave considerable thought to the parameters in the bylaw and the size of the district. And while they could have elected to do the minimum and just try to check the box to meet the mandate, they ultimately agreed that having more area than the minimum can lead to more opportunity to accomplish several housing goals identified in our housing production plan and our comprehensive master plan. They selected areas that were received favorably during the planning process, areas that provided the opportunity to redevelop underutilized or vacant buildings or parking lots to make more efficient use of previously developed land, areas that encourage improved pedestrian connectivity, and they wanted to select areas that provided a mix of short, medium, and long-term opportunities for development in order to mitigate any potential demands on town services. The last thing I'll just end with, as I'm sure Madam Moderator would appreciate, is just mentioning that this particular article is a little unusual compared to other zoning articles in that it requires a simple majority vote as opposed to a 2/3 vote at town meeting. So I'll turn it over for any questions.
Oh, thank you. One thing I know that I've heard in the community is just because we passed this bylaw and and have an overlay, that does not mean that new construction will happen overnight or happen at all. This is really just setting the parameters for a section. Does not mean it's actually, 50 million apartments aren't going to be built.
That's correct. There's no requirement that any of these units get built. But to your point, we can't have our zoning be the barrier to development.
Before I move on to the next article, there is a procedural question that has come in that I think is a good question to address. And that, because it actually applies to any of these articles, can you discuss the motion to reconsider and how that will be handled, especially if they use Article 1 as an example, is approved or denied and the majority of people leave? I think we all know where that has come from. So I do think this is pertinent to any article, to be quite honest, as it is a good procedural question for us to get educated on.
Well, I'm frankly glad the question was asked. Since the last meeting, I've done a lot of research into the whole question of motions for reconsideration, and I've also spoken with town council. If a community doesn't have any kind of a bylaw regulating motions for reconsideration, then the question of whether or not to accept such a motion is left entirely at the discretion of the moderator. So, frankly, I think we can do better than that, and we'll be working on developing a bylaw between now and October that we can present to town meeting, which will clearly delineate the parameters of when a motion for reconsideration will be accepted. Between now and then, including at this upcoming meeting, I'm making the decision ahead of time that a motion for reconsideration will only be accepted if it relates specifically to a technical problem with the motion that was just passed or that it's asking to be reconsidered. So for example, if the intent of the motion was to appropriate $100,000, but the motion as stated or as printed on the screen at the front of the room said $10,000, then that's clearly something that needs to be corrected by way of a reconsideration. Or if there's some definitive question as to whether or not an amendment which was on the floor simultaneously with the motion was decided on first, or if people were confused about which was decided, that would be a procedural question that might warrant reconsideration. But I will not be accepting a motion for reconsideration that simply says, I think we made the wrong decision and we want to talk about it again later on in the day or at any other point during the meeting. So I hope that clarifying that in advance will allow people to understand what's going to happen at the meeting, and will also allow people to understand that based on particularly what happened at the last meeting, I think people feel that once a vote is taken, that should be the vote of the meeting without any kind of reconsideration happening thereafter.
Thank you, Angela. And actually, while we were addressing that, some questions came in with regard to the MBTA zoning bylaw. So I'm going to address those right now. The one question is, why are we doing so many? I'm assuming you're talking about residential units. Why not do the minimum and add more later?
Joe, do you want me to take a stab or?
Or you can take
Okay.
it. I can add anything.
So that was one of the very questions that the advisory committee wrestled with from the very beginning. So after a lot of discussions, they viewed this as an opportunity to try to do what they thought was really best for the Westford community, rather than simply trying to check the smallest box to satisfy the mandate. They looked at a number of things, as Joe mentioned. They looked at a lot of the vacant commercial office space that we've had for decades and will likely worsen as more and more leases come up after COVID. They looked at some underdeveloped properties. They're looking for ways to bolster commercial recreation, and they decided with the areas that they picked that it made the most sense and could do a lot of good for Westford, and would create more opportunities to have more kinds of housing and give more opportunities for our aging population to downsize or age in place. So they did consider a lot. I will say that the draft district initially was, I think, double the size. And it was a very iterative process that cut it down to what it is. They are mindful that while it creates a lot of good opportunity, more than if they simply went for the smallest area, if we do get unexpected results, we do retain the ability to come in and amend the district later on and to make adjustments as we think is best for the town. So.
Great, thank you. Another question regarding this bylaw. What is the impact to Westford of this article if this article or bylaw fails?
So the short answer, if it fails at this town meeting, our deadline is not until the end of this calendar year. So we would have another opportunity to bring back a refined version of the bylaw to the October town meeting. We did not think it would be best to wait until the October town meeting, of course, the last one before the deadline. But if we fail to get a compliant bylaw in place by the end of the year, we would be cut off from many types of grants. We could be subject to enforcement. We could lose monies for infrastructure and monies for schools as well. And we don't know the full extent of what that means. But the governor was quite clear that monies that you're used to receiving for both schools and or infrastructure would be at risk.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Another question, has research been done that compares how many units might be developed in the zoning districts in the MBTA bylaw if they were developed at 40B developments?
I'm going to say no, and that's a tricky question for a variety of reasons. So first of all, we are above our 10% subsidized housing inventory. So we're not as vulnerable to 40Bs as we were when we were below the 10% threshold. I will say that the more recent, the Bell Apartments, people can picture those. Those are probably some of the densest developments, multifamily developments we've seen in town. And they're getting close to just about 10 units per acre. They were not limited by any maximum or minimum density. They did the densest that they could at 10 units per acre. And while the unit capacity that Joe mentioned for the state, it comes up with, you know, some range of numbers for unit capacity. Those numbers are not realistic for Westford when we have no municipal sewer and we require a lot of land for our septic, our drainage, our parking. So I don't know, there wasn't a specific analysis done versus 40Bs, but I don't know that's a fair comparison to make.
Okay, thank you. And then we have, I believe this might have been answered already, but maybe we missed it. What is the minimum area that needs to be in the zone?
So the absolute minimum area is 50 acres, but it's not simply a minimum area requirement. You also have to satisfy the minimum unit count. So to say 50 acres, that's the short answer, but we're not sure we could get near the unit capacity with that low an acreage based on other factors.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more questions coming in on this. So we will move along to Article 19. which is the solicitation and canvassing door to door. And for that, I'd like to welcome our Chief of Police, Mark Chambers, to address that one. And I believe you're also going to address Article 20. So
Yes. Yeah, hopefully we can get them both out at the same time.
Yeah.
So under Article 19, well, first off, thank you for having me. Article 19, the soliciting and canvassing door-to-door bylaw, essentially will replace our current bylaw for transient merchants under Chapter 157 of the current bylaws, which went into effect in 1970. So as the budget review was occurring over the course of the end of the summer and through the fall, we were asked to take a look at any of the fees that our departments were charging for different services that we were offering. One of those that the police department does is the solicitor's permitting, and we were only charging a $5 fee, which was enacted back in 1970. So we did check with neighboring communities, and the average was around $25. So we had an opportunity to address the cost of the permitting. It does take an officer about 20 minutes to 30 minutes to do each individual permit. So we want to make sure that we're kind of capturing their efforts and the town paying them to do those types of things. So and with that, we also had an opportunity to update some of the definitions and really kind of flesh out the bylaw. So the very first part is just defining what exactly is going to fall underneath the soliciting and canvassing door-to-door bylaw. It does not include nonprofit or political organizations. Youth organizations will still be okay. It really does just aim to address anything for commercial purposes or professional solicitors. So think of the like the solar or the magazines that we've been plagued with over the past several summers. Canvassing door to door, the registration, the information that's going to be required of both the businesses and the individuals will need to be are defined more properly. The registration fee again has been updated to the $25. Information around the display of the registration card that they'll have to provide with, and what information will be on there. If anything is denied, what the process or who can be denied for these. What the exceptions will be, including our minors under the age of 18. So some of the sports groups that go door to door in town, obviously that wouldn't affect. And then I haven't seen one in years, but a newspaper carrier, like the old newsboys that would drive around. And then what the duties of the actual solicitor are when they make contact with the resident, as well as the restrictions on the methods of solicitation and how they canvass. If we do find violations, it does also specify what the penalty is and increase of a fine for each offense of $300, and then really does regulate the appeals process. We just had one that was appealed about 3 months ago that went in front of the Board of Selectmen. The old language was the chief of police shall deny a permit if certain conditions were met. Now there's some timeframes that are associated with it, and there's a little bit more leeway on my behalf before we have to go to the select board for an appeal. So that's essentially it for that, for the solicitor bylaw.
thank you. I don't see any questions coming. Oh, wait a minute. Will the licensed person need to show their licenses? I'm going to infer that you're talking about the person asking the question. You're talking about if that person comes to your house, are they required to show their license to you if you request it?
Yes, it should. So that's the registration card. It will
Yep.
say that they're an authorized, they've followed the proper procedure, and it will be a town of Westford approved registration card with all of their information, who they work for. And that information is also specified within the bylaw, what information will be on the card.
Right. And see no more questions on Article 19. Let's move to Article 20, the civil fingerprinting bylaw.
So this one's a little more fun. So one of the things that we did take a look at when we were revising the solicitor's bylaw is we do have the right to query any individuals that come in for licensing within community, but under a query check, you do not get any criminal history from outside of the Commonwealth. So one of the things that we were really looking at in order to, if the town of Westford is going to be authorizing these individuals to be out in the community or license them or provide these permits, we really wanted to make sure that we were doing as much of a quick background check as we could. And one of the ways that we're able to do that is with the civil fingerprinting bylaw, which will apply, if passed, would apply to hawkers and peddlers, essentially what we just spoke about in the solicitor's permit. Owner or operator of public conveyances, hackney drivers, essentially taxis, and then ice cream truck vendors, which we currently already do, except for the fingerprinting, and well, they're similarly licensed. And what this will allow us to do is obtain a criminal record from outside of Massachusetts. When we take those fingerprints through the federal database, the AFIS system, we have an electronic system at the Westford Police Department in our booking area. When we take fingerprints, it's submitted to the national database, and a criminal history will be returned within just a couple hours. So we're able to more thoroughly vet any of these licenses. And one of the reasons why these 4 licenses were considered is these really are the licenses that you have an opportunity, well, they would have an opportunity where it's a more of a one-on-one or more of a private interaction when they come to your home, or you get into an Uber or a Lyft or some of these public conveyances, where you really want to assure that these people have been properly vetted if we're issuing these permits. There will be an entire process used by the police department. So when they apply for these licenses, and we fingerprint them, the information will only be stored for as long as the licenses are valid, which we have worked with town council on, with the internal workings of how we're going to be handling that. So, and then the other thing was, again, just collecting a fee. So the fee of the fingerprinting service will be $100. And again, they would only be required to fingerprint each time that they get a new license. So depending on the length of time that the licenses are good for is how often they'd have to get fingerprinted. But the $100 fee, some will stay with us, but the state does mandate that we collect a fee if we're going to use the fingerprint service for these types of bylaws.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions coming in. So
Actually, I had one with my hand up, I guess. So
Oh,
I got,
okay.
just to clarify, so if you call for an Uber, they could be coming in from Chelmsford or Boston, right? So is the fingerprinting done through Uber as a company, or is each individual driver has to get pay that fee?
So Scott, that's a great question. I don't know what Uber's internal policy is. I do know that there are some local businesses here that do those that are required for like the local license, because their primary business is out of Westford, that would undergo it. As far as Uber or Lyft or some of the rideshare services, I don't have a great answer for that. I'm not. I would imagine so. If they were applying for a permit through us, they would fall under the bylaw. I'm just not sure what Uber's or Lyft's requirements are.
Great. Any more questions? Okay, we'll move on to Article 22, which is a citizen's petition with regard to Columbus Day and an Indigenous Peoples Day. For that, I'm going to ask Tony DeLeo, who is the person who brought forth this petition, to make a brief presentation, and we can entertain questions after that.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me explain our petition. I'll read the petition as it will appear on the warrant. It says, shall the Westford Board of the Select Board declare the second Monday in October as both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, superseding the previous declaration that eliminated Columbus Day, with appropriate exercises in the school and throughout the town to recognize the positive contributions of each group. That's what we're petitioning for. We believe that the decision that was made last year has created a divide in the community. And the purpose of this article is to propose a compromise that hopefully will bridge that divide. It will allow all the citizens who want to celebrate Columbus Day, the national holiday, to do so. But it also allows people who want to recognize and celebrate the contributions of Indigenous people to also do so. And that's the purpose of the petition. We want to try to, like I said, bridge this divide and heal the division that is formed in the community.
So I'll open the floor to any questions. And while I wait for those to come in, I'll take a brief moment here to thank everyone on the panel who came out tonight. And all the committee members who have been working behind the scenes as well to get us ready for this town meeting. I know it's no easy task. I would also like to thank the WestfordCAT for recording this and sharing this out. And make sure I get everybody. And lastly, I'd like to thank all the voters who attended tonight, who took time out of their evening to get prepared for town meeting. I am not seeing any questions come in with regard to this article. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. What? Yes, one. Is this a citizen's petition advisory? If this passes, will it go to ballot?
I don't know the answer to that. I assume that it will go back to the select board. I'm not sure of the legal requirement of what happens if this passes. But it would go back to the select board with a mandate that the town has selected to have both celebrated on that day.
Scott or Kristen, is this something you guys can address, or Angela? Nope, Angela's not here.
I don't know the answer. I would defer to town council on that one.
Yeah, I would agree.
I
Probably.
don't believe, I would also defer to town council, but I don't believe that the town meeting in this instance can require the select board to do
No.
something. I think, as the petitioner said, it would end up being advisory to the board.
Right.
Okay, and somebody asked, did we do Article 21? I'm sorry, I skipped over Article 21 as that is a part of the consent agenda. And we, it will be voted on at the top of the meeting.
Vicky, could I, just before we go? say something?
Absolutely.
Okay, first of all,
Go ahead.
because you mentioned the consent agenda a couple of times, I want to let people know that the consent agenda is just a grouping of articles that are either repeating every year or generally non-controversial that we put together to vote in one vote to save time, and that I will go through them before we have that vote so that any voter who has a question or comment about any one of those can state that they do have a question or comment, and I'll pull that out for discussion rather than for vote with the rest of the consent agenda items. And the other thing I forgot to mention is that check-in is opening at 8 a.m. We start at 9, but check-in is opening at 8. So it would be great for people to arrive early, get checked in, and get seated so we can start right on time.
Thank you, Angela. And actually with that, I'm just also going to remind people of some of the things we pointed out at the top of this meeting, that there's a treasure trove of information on the town's website with regard to the budget and the various aspects of the budget that we discussed earlier, as well as the town meeting motions and other supporting documents with regard to any of the bylaws. I would also, again, put a plug in for the League of Women Voters. We have links on our website too, to actually a great series of videos that Angela did with regard to explaining town meeting, as well as some links to some of the budget videos that was also done earlier this year. And then finally, with that, once again, I'd like to thank everybody.
Vicky, excuse me. I just see one other question that I think Angela might want to address.
Sorry, I didn't scroll down enough. Will there be a time limit for speakers at the microphone?
Yes, as in the past, presenters will be given 6 minutes to make their presentations, and all speakers at the microphone will be given 2 minutes. I'm not going to yank you off the stage at the end of that period of time, but I will remind you that the time is up and you need to wrap it up.
We don't get the Oscar music playing us off stage? No.
Maybe next time.
Right. And are we starting at 9? Yes, we are starting at 9, provided I would say everybody is there or that.
That's correct. If there's, we've done everything possible to ensure that we don't have a big line of people coming in at 9 o'clock. If there's not a big line, then we will start right at 9. So again, I would just advise people to get there early so that we can get started early and finish early as well.
And I'll add to that because, you know, there is, I think we have not addressed, or maybe it's been a while since we addressed the parking at Westford Academy. They only have space for about 500, I believe. There will be overflow parking at Crisafulli and Robinson, and there will be this time, correct me if I'm wrong, buses that will transport you from those two parking lots to Westford Academy. So I would echo Angela's assessment to get there early so that even if you have to go to the overflow, you have time to make it over to the Academy.
And there's a few other procedural town meeting questions
Yeah.
that I'm sure we can answer.
Yeah, sure we can. Both rooms can ask and be heard in each room.
That's correct. Thanks to WestfordCAT, we have a two-way audio visual system, which has been permanently installed between those two rooms. That's going to allow both visual and audio seeing and hearing from one room to another. So both rooms will be able to hear and see what's going on in the other room.
And what happens if the warrant is not finished by the end time of town meeting on Saturday?
Yeah, well, we will go if we have to until 5 o'clock on Saturday, but that will be the end of our meeting then. And if we haven't finished the business that is contained in the warrant, we will reconvene on Monday night at 7.
Great. Excellent. Any more questions, whether they be on an article or procedural? Oh. All right, then. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to WestfordCAT. Thank you to the town committees and town manager and all those who attended tonight. Hope to see you on Saturday, 23rd.